So, Alex, this morning when I logged on to the work Slack, VG247 was in battle stations mode because of the FTC's case against Microsoft in America, and a little thing called Discovery. Loads of court documents have leaked, which include about 3 years out of date plans for the Xbox business going forward. So
well,
a
let's
lot
be
of the
clear,
stuff,
to be fair,
yeah.
Some of it is 3 years out of date. A lot of these documents are dated, so there are some documents that are 2019, but some of them are last year. So some of them are probably quite accurate to where they're currently at, which is mad.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's insane to get this, and for it to be, I mean, it's just freely available. There's 5 sort of real standout things about it. We've been reporting on it on the site, but the first thing is that Microsoft, in an email from Phil Spencer, they were talking for a second time about wanting to acquire Nintendo, which is something that they were infamously laughed out of the room for about 20 years ago. But they were talking about it again in 2020, which I find, again, the prospect of anyone buying Nintendo is insane because they're the most solvent company on the planet. I don't think anyone can buy them. They have no debt.
They are, but I think it's sort of people acting surprised at this. I'm like, what planet are you on? Nintendo is I would say probably the single strongest IP house now that isn't called Disney. And so you have to imagine, for instance, that even Disney has looked at Nintendo and gone, well, Apple would also be another potential landing spot for them, or some of these big Chinese companies like Tencent and stuff. In fact, Tencent has a stake in Nintendo, and obviously over the last couple of years, the Saudi government has bought 15% of Nintendo, which is probably a cause for concern. Wow. Yeah, the PIF, the public investment fund that's owned by the Saudi royalty and the Saudi country. I think it's 15. I think it's upwards of 15% now. Just quickly checking. No, it's not. It's not quite 15. They're coming up on 9%, but that makes them the biggest single owner of Nintendo shares, apart from Nintendo itself.
That's mad. That's mad.
So there's been a lot of interest about Nintendo. So I think people are acting shocked, and I've seen people go, Microsoft is a cancer on the industry. They want to just acquire everyone. I'm like, of course, if you're a company and you're coming into this space, or you're looking at this space, whether you're Apple or Microsoft or Disney or whoever, Nintendo is going to be on your list.
Absolutely, yeah.
The story about them being laughed out of the room 20 years ago, that was a time when I think this has been reported quite well in some of the books about the making of the first Xbox and stuff. But that was a time when Steve Ballmer, who used to oscillate between genius CEO and slightly clueless nutter. But I think he pushed the Xbox team to go out and to talk to everyone they could. So we know, for instance, back then, when Sega was on its way out of the hardware business, they talked to Sega. Didn't work out, but obviously it was notable that they still got a bunch of, they got Jet Set Radio and Sega.
Yeah, the original Xbox was very much a sort of sequel to the Dreamcast in a lot of ways.
And I think in one of those books, and I can certainly speak to knowing about it, there was an attempt back at that period on Square as well. That apparently went quite far and then fell apart. So it doesn't surprise me at all that they went to Nintendo and got laughed out of the room. And it doesn't really surprise me that... So the email from Phil is dated June 2020. To be fair, I don't know if that's American or British date formatting, so it's either June or August, but either way, middle of 2020. And yeah, it's quite literally, bless Phil, he sent it at 12 in the morning, 12 a.m. So this is bedtime, midnight thoughts.
A little bit bleary-eyed,
But, he says... He's talking in a business sense, and I think some people see this and say evil because he's saying stuff like, "Oh, the investment makeup of Nintendo is changing," which he's dead correct. You look at what's happened with Nintendo shares and stuff over the last couple of years, the Saudis coming in, stuff like that. The world for Nintendo is changing, and he's saying he can see a case where things shift sufficiently that maybe an acquisition becomes palatable.
But he also notes in the email, but right now they've got too much cash in the bank.
Yeah, Nintendo's always sitting on a huge... Even when they have a disaster like them, that is how they've been able to weather disasters like the Wii U, right? And you forget, obviously, they get, kickback from the Pokemon Company and all this stuff. So they've got loads of money.
Did you just as an aside, did you read Tom's theory in the work Slack about how the next Nintendo console, they might deliberately make it a shiter so they can remaster all the games for the next console after nobody's played them?
That tends to be the pattern, doesn't it? Although I think they've got. Let's wait and see if the new console is even backwards compatible, because that's the one thing that all these leaks and rumors, no one seems to know. People are saying different things. Because if it's not backwards compatible, they can sell us Breath of the Wild again. They can sell us Tears of the Kingdom again. They can sell us Mario Kart 8 again.
Yeah,
anyway.
it actually doesn't make business sense to make it backward compatible. But yeah,
it doesn't surprise me. One thing I do want to say about this email, the most interesting thing, everyone's got caught up in Phil saying, I'd love to acquire Nintendo. But of course he'd love to acquire Nintendo. I would like to own a Ferrari. You know, it is what it is, but I can't afford it. But I think the more interesting thing about this email is it confirms that around the time they were working towards acquiring Bethesda, they were also working on Warner Brothers. And we had leaks and rumors at the time saying Warner Brothers was up for sale, but it was never confirmed. But this gives us confirmation. Warner Brothers Gaming was up. Warner Brothers Interactive was for sale. Is it still? Who knows? Are Microsoft still in the game there, or did they walk away? I think the other thing that's interesting about that Phil says is that he describes Warner, I'm just looking at it now, he describes it as difficult. He says the biggest obstacle for Warner Brothers is IP ownership, because if you would be purchasing the studios and stuff, but you wouldn't get the Batman IP. You wouldn't get the DC IPs. You wouldn't get Harry Potter.
Wouldn't get Lord of the Rings.
You wouldn't get Lord of the Rings. In fact, the only one that they might sell because it was connected to, because it began as games, would be MK, maybe. But even then, Warner's making MK films and stuff like that. So maybe they wouldn't even sell that. So you'd get NetherRealm, but not Mortal Kombat. And presumably, if that happens, I feel like Ed Boon just leaves, right? So maybe that's why they walked away. But I think actually that's the more interesting thing. People have jumped on the Nintendo thing because it's quite a sexy headline. But I actually think in the grand scheme, the slightly more interesting thing is that Xbox was in talks.
So moving on to their other infamous acquisition of Bethesda, so that there is a document that is about 3 years out of date detailing a load of planned Bethesda Softworks releases. It includes information about the Oblivion remaster, which we already kind of knew was in the mix somewhere.
There was a leaker who's connected clearly to Virtuous, who have done a lot of remakes. And this leaker talked about an Oblivion remaster and also talked about a Metal Gear Solid 3 remaster. And then when they announced Metal Gear Solid Delta, it became clear that bit was correct, because that's being made by Virtuous. And so I think at that point we could agree that Oblivion was happening. And it makes sense, right? These games take a long time to make.
Absolutely,
people love Oblivion. I still think it's a better game than Skyrim, personally. So it makes sense.
I mean, I think it's a better game than Starfield, but
probably, yeah.
But I think, I mean, Oblivion is one of those. It was a lot of people's first Elder Scrolls game as well. It's like Morrowind put it on the map, and it was like the first big console game from them. But Oblivion was when it really became like when it went really stratospheric. So it's got a lot of that kind of nostalgia factor for a lot more people. So an Oblivion remaster makes sense. They're also talking about a Fallout 3 remaster. We know that Fallout 4 is at some point getting a new gen refresh.
But is that not just going to be, we've unlocked the frame rate or something? Whereas if you do a Fallout 3 remaster, that game, even more so than Oblivion, I would say, because if you run Oblivion on a high-spec PC and maybe whack a couple of mods on it, it looks pretty close to Skyrim. But Fallout, because of the nature of the Fallout world, it's got that 360 gen like piss filter thing going on. And compared to Fallout 4 in particular, it's M76. It's a big difference. Yeah. The interesting thing there, I think, is if you remaster that, you're only like, you're 50% of the way there to remastering New Vegas as well, because all the assets are, well, not all, but many of the assets are shared. So if I was them, I'd be doing both.
Probably re-releasing them as a package, I would imagine, which would be consistent with what we've seen with Metal Gear Solid and things like that.
The thing on this one that made me laugh was there was a slide that says tentpole releases, and this is what it says. Fiscal year 21, Starfield and Fallout. Fiscal year 22, Fallout. Fiscal year 24, The Elder Scrolls and Fallout. Fiscal year 25, Starfield. Fiscal year 28, Fallout. fiscal year 29, The Elder Scrolls and Starfield. So there's two things. That's funny because it's just like we're making the same game but different iterations of it over and over again. But the other thing that's interesting about that is obviously all of this has fallen by the wayside. Like Starfield was down for fiscal year 21. It ended up coming out in the middle of 2023. So we can see that all the time frames have gone buggered. But what's interesting is like fiscal year 25 Starfield. So did that mean they were going to iterate quite a quick turnaround, or does that mean they were going to do an expansion? And then fiscal year 29 Starfield. So that put obviously 8 years between Starfield's original planned release and then this later Starfield game that would come out the same fiscal year as Elder Scrolls 6, probably.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. But you can also see on this, you can see stuff that, so like fiscal year 21, they've got Project Hibiki, which we know is Hi-Fi Rush. Because they did some like GDC talks and stuff like that, and it was all called Hibiki and that. So Hi-Fi Rush was obviously earlier this year. So you can see they're like 2 years off, roughly,
it's like a
on
2-year
average.
Shift,
Indiana Jones is down as 22. I bet that's a 2024, like a late 24 or an early 25 game. I bet.
What do you think has pushed this along then? Just like the aftermath of COVID and stuff like that, or?
I think COVID. I think probably they had to do integration with Microsoft, right? So that's probably had its cost.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, we've been for a bloody integration at our company, and it's a lot. It's a lot of stuff. So I think a combination of everyone got pushed by COVID, and then obviously you've got the integration with Microsoft, and also I think on these every internal document I've ever seen, almost it feels like, is always hugely optimistic on release dates. Except for like Capcom. Capcom tend to be pretty dead on. They tend to be quite conservative, but it always feels like you see an internal document or someone tells you something they've seen on an internal document, and I think to myself, well, you can add a year onto that. At least.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, and there's some, obviously you got Doom Year Zero on this as well. And you've got
a Ghostwire Tokyo sequel, which I'm surprised about.
Yeah, and see, I wonder because when this document was produced, this one was 2019. So when this document was produced, Ghostwire was 3 years from coming out. So it's like, does that still happen? Was the game successful enough? However, they've just announced 6 million players, so maybe it's a Game Pass hit and it's done better. It's had good legs. So maybe
I really hope that gets a sequel because I like that game.
The stuff that's most interesting, I think, is the stuff where we don't know what it is. So it's like you've got Project Kestrel, whatever that might be.
Morrowind remake.
You've got Project Platinum. You've got an expansion for Project Kestrel, which does suggest it's probably a big RPG and a licensed IP game. So it's like, I wonder what that is, because that's not Indiana Jones. That's on this list as fiscal year 24, which means we're probably looking at like 2026. But I wonder what that could be. Is that going to be another tie-up with Disney because there's already a relationship there? And also interesting on this list is something that isn't there, which is Wolfenstein. No Wolfenstein 3. And everyone, myself included, just sort of assumed that would just be a matter of course. In fact, I remember interviewing those guys for Wolfenstein Youngblood, and I said to them, what about Mecha Hitler? And they were like, well, we're going to save Mecha Hitler for the third game. Like, they said that out loud.
And Youngblood was very much like is a bit of a sideshow on the way to the third game,
cheap
right?
and cheerful, like co-op expansion. I think they even sold it at a reduced price, right? Like,
yeah.
But there's a lot on this list. Obviously, Dishonored is the other big thing, right? And even if you shift these timelines back, also, I think the other interesting thing is, again, Elder Scrolls 6 was on fiscal year 24, which means if you give them 2 or 3 years, that means you're looking at fiscal year 26 or fiscal year 27 for the Elder Scrolls 6, which is a quicker turnaround than Fallout to Starfield was. Yeah, which perhaps shows that they're trying to find ways to speed up the BGS.
Well, I did wonder after Bethesda got acquired if one of the upshots of that would be that, like, with Microsoft's money behind them, Bethesda would actually be able to spool up and start bringing games out a bit quicker.
Yeah, and I think
So
they always build these games. That's one advantage of them having their own engine, right? Is that stuff from one game always pans over back over to the other, and it's the same for Rockstar, right? It's like I'm sure a lot of the Red Dead stuff, a lot of the Red Dead tech and the volumetric clouds and all that stuff is all going to be in GTA 6. And similarly, you can now see when they did Fallout 4, I was like, this settlement building thing's interesting and a bit of a weird choice. Now, you can see that probably in part existed because they knew they were making Starfield, and it was almost like a prototype for what they ended up building in Starfield. So
much more interesting and much more fitting in Starfield as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so the other thing is new Xbox controller with haptic feedback and gyro controls. Essentially, we know that wasn't there a discussion with Phil Spencer where after the DualSense had come out, he was talking about like maybe integrating some of those features into the next Xbox controller. There was a survey asking people about haptic controls, so it looks like that they've had that discussion and now they're coming out with it. It's going to be a weird one though, because obviously it's coming out in the middle of the gen, and support for it might be buoyed up by the fact that these features exist on the other platforms, so that it makes it much easier to port those things over. But again, you're going to have a situation where you've got these controller features in an expensive add-on that aren't necessarily going to be supported in other titles.
So that's the question. We'll come on to this bit, but is this going to ship with the new machines? Because I think it probably will.
Yeah, I reckon so, yeah.
I mean, it's fine. I'm on the record as a DualSense hater. So, because none of the haptic stuff is used particularly well in any game except Astro. I actually find it quite annoying in things like Spider-Man when you're swinging and the sticks are fighting against you. I just think it's sort of lame. And it's even when it is good, it's not worth to me the difference in battery life between my DualSense and an Xbox controller with double A's in it, or even my Xbox Elite controller, which is charged on a dock. So it's like, if this is going to tank the battery life of the controller to 3 hours, 4 hours, I ain't interested. But, I get it. People like the haptics. I like the look of the controller with the two-tone. I think that looks cool. It's like half black, half white. The paddles are black and the rest is a glossy white. Glossy's a bad idea, though, guys. Don't do that. You've got time to change it. It hasn't been announced. However, so what I find... Again, I'm the wanker who's picking out like weird esoteric stuff on these documents. But what I find interesting is it says play anywhere on this slide about this new controller. And it says Xbox Wireless 2, which is the protocol that connects it to Xbox machines. There's Bluetooth 5.2, which is the protocol for connecting to your phone or whatever. But then there's Direct to Cloud, which as far as I know is new. And what I'm wondering is this going to be... So right now, let's say you have one of the posh Samsung TVs that has the Xbox app on it, where you can play xCloud just through your TV, no Xbox. Because they are out. Let's say you've got one of those. The way that works right now is you Bluetooth your controller to your TV. Is the suggestion here that Direct to Cloud is the controller somehow through a mobile app or something, connecting directly to Wi-Fi and connecting directly to your cloud instance
That's how Stadia works, right?
Lower latency, so that instead of the controller sending a signal to your TV and the TV or stick or whatever or phone sending that to the cloud, your controller is directly connected through Wi-Fi to the cloud shard, and that is really interesting. So yeah, that's, and it does say seamless pair and switch, new mobile app features, see paired devices and cloud. So it does sound like that's what that is.
I mean, it sounds like they've lifted that from how Stadia works. Stadia had a lot of good ideas, but was just terribly marketed.
Well, and Google doesn't have the patience to get a product like that to be successful. They get bored. And then sack everyone.
They're like Sega in the 90s. They're just like...
Can you believe that Baldur's Gate 3 was like a Stadia... It was going to have Stadia exclusive features and stuff, and Stadia didn't even last long enough for that to happen. And presumably Larian secured a big bag, got millions off Google for that, and then never had to pay back because Google chose to close Stadia.
We might have to thank Google for Baldur's Gate 3 even having an Act 3. Okay, now this is an interesting one because so Xbox Series is getting a mid-gen refresh. I think everyone assumed that. Of course, most consoles have had mid-gen refreshes, whether they're just slim versions or whatever. But there's not an increase in power. There's actually a focus on power efficiency, so that it costs less to run, etc. So there's no performance upgrades, and the Series X is going diskless. So this might well be like the end of discs as far as Xbox is concerned.
Well, remember the rumors, all the rumors we've heard about the PlayStation 5 Pro, also, or the PlayStation 5 refresh, whatever, and the leaked images out of China, if they are real and stuff. All those are a machine without a disk drive. Just the difference is Sony's going to sell a separate disk drive, which is a genius play on Sony's part because it means you get to sell a disk drive that would have cost you $20 to include in the machine, and you probably sell it for $80. And then also, by selling it for that much money, you basically tank the attach rate because consumers don't want to pay it. And as the game, and as physical sales drop, publishers go, well, there's no point in even doing a physical version. We're getting that more and more now anyway. We might as well. Alan Wake's, apart from that limited edition thing that limited run games, whoever's doing, Alan Wake's digital only. So you've sort of, we're entering that world. I think that battle is lost. I'm waiting for John from Digital Foundry, John Lindemann. I know he's on a flight to Tokyo right now for Tokyo Game Show, and also I think he's just going on holiday, and just happens to coincide with TGS. And I'm sort of waiting for him to get off of the plane and see this because he's going to be very upset because he's a disc devotee. Yeah,
I mean, physical media it was always the writing has been on the wall for a while. PC has been digital only effectively for a long time. I haven't had an optical drive in my PC for how long?
I haven't. We had to burn a DVD for my wife's granddad of our wedding video because obviously all that gets delivered through the internet. They send you a Google Drive link and you download it. Obviously he can't do any of that. He has watched it, but he wanted a copy so he can show it to other people. And I had to buy a DVD RW drive off Amazon and a stack of discs because I don't have anything. Even all my laptops are all diskless now. But don't get me wrong, I love physical media. So it is sad, but I think it is just a sign of the times. It's. I'm curious what XDL means because there's Xbox Series X and then Xbox Series X in XDL. I assume that's a color because the controller also comes in those colorways. 2 USB-A's and 1 USB-C. Right now, the Xbox is 3 USB-A's, so the USB-C is useful.
That's new,
Better power supply. These documents have got it pegged for what, the fiscal year 2025. So that's quite far away.
That is an interesting shift, though, that we're moving away from this being marketed on being any kind of a power upgrade and more toward this is actually cheaper to run. That being a selling point. I don't think anyone's ever given a shit about that until basically now because it's it cost £1,000 just to turn your aircon on. But it's interesting that that is seen as a bullet point, whereas reportedly Sony are going the other way, right? We are actually getting a PS5 Pro as far as all the rumors are concerned.
Yeah, and I think that's the interesting thing is that Phil Spencer, because I've seen some people today going, Phil's lied. And I was like, he hasn't lied because he said they weren't going to do a Pro model, and they're not doing a Pro model. They're doing the same machine. They're doing a mid-gen refresh. That means this is more Xbox One S than it is Xbox One X. But this drives home what a disaster these documents are, really, because this has all sorts of shit on it, and these consoles, it's got Elwood 1 terabyte launch. So Elwood is a Series S. Don't know if that's actually a physical refresh or if it's just they'll retool the Series S as it is. But they've got that.
I've seen a report that it's the same physical design.
But for the end of August 2025 at $299, and then Brooklyn late October, early November. And even this document is nuts. It says 60-day separation between launches enables dialogue with different audiences. allows us to focus on new improvements in CBIOL, which CBIOL is the Series S, tell stories beyond console, whatever, adds value, blah, blah, blah. But it even says last chance, Edith. Edith is the current Series S. 512 gigabytes at 199 as Black Friday before the end of life. So it's like it's even got their Black Friday plans for 2 years' time. And that's just disastrous. So I think actually the interesting thing on this front, it's good to know that it's coming. I love the design because it basically looks like it's just a Series X of the refresh Series X, which is codenamed Brooklyn. It's just a Series X, but with the corners shaved off, because when you lose the disk drive, it doesn't need to be a square anymore, because the disk drive's the thing that is that
absolutely
shape.
yeah.
So
yeah,
they've just
yeah,
it looks
yeah.
like a Sonos speaker, is what it looks like.
Yeah. Looks like a cake of DVDRs.
Like it genuinely looks like.
Yeah, 100% does. Yeah, absolutely.
So I couldn't hear you there, but it genuinely looks like this is the Sonos Move, I think. But it genuinely looks like a more cylindrical version of that. It probably will be a similar size as well, looking at it compared to the Series X.
I wonder if there's going to be a bracket or something where you can still put it on its side, because I have to have mine on its side. So, but that's not really that interesting. Okay, so. But yeah, that is wild. That because I think the idea that everyone assumed, a lot of people assumed at the start of this gen, that because it had happened in the previous gen, we would get some mid-gen power upgrades. And I always find that really dubious, because the environment that existed for the PS4, Xbox One generation that led to the necessity of new hardware doesn't exist here. So halfway through the PS4 generation, 4K TVs absolutely rocketed and took off. And then you had there was a real disparity between what your TV was capable of and what your console was capable of. So, the base PS4 couldn't do 4K and stuff like that.
I think that's part of it, but you know what I think is another part of it?
Yeah.
I think if you're Xbox, you cannot launch an even more powerful console while still maintaining support for the Series S. Because then you're asking developers to support 3 different SKUs. What Sony's doing is asking developers to support 2 now, if they have a Pro, which is what Microsoft have been doing since the start of the gen. But I actually think by making the decision to have a cheap model, which has panned out for them, what developers think be damned. I said this, I did a tweet at Gamescom, which upset a lot of people, where I said the number one thing that I heard from developers at Gamescom, the thing about Gamescom is I don't think audience necessarily gets it, because they don't experience it, and that's fine. But it's like you're not just in appointments, because everything in appointments is quite dry, and developers are sticking to promoting their game and sticking to the lines that they've been drilled into them by publicists and stuff. Developers, publishers, marketeers, whatever. But then obviously you see people in the back of stands while you're waiting for appointments to start. You go to dinner with people, you bump into people in the pub. And in those conversations, the number one theme was people complaining about the Series S. And it wasn't even me going up to people and saying, what do you think about the Series S? It would be me catching up with, say, somebody who works in development, who used to work in the media, who I know, and having a catch up with them. And they're with their colleagues. And then I turn to their colleagues to be introduced, and what they're currently talking about is the Series S and how they hate it. And so I tweeted saying that, and some people got very upset and said I was trying to kill Xbox, which not at all. It's just like, because I think the Series S is the best value machine on the market. I use the Series S. I've got an X in my office, but I've got an S in the living room, and I play a lot of Street Fighter Online and stuff on it. It's fine. But it's a complicated situation, and I think if you introduce a third power SKU into it, it's just...
it just makes a bad situation even worse. Or a tricky situation even trickier. I mean, I'm on record as like, I love the Series S, I love the proposition, but I do accept that like it has caused a lot of problems, and the Baldur's Gate 3 situation is where all that really came to a head, right? But on the other hand, I've spoken to developers who hate the Series S and hate having to support it. I've also spoken to other developers who insist that it's just a case of like turning off some features and they don't see what the big deal is. So there is a mix of experiences there. But as you say,
it absolutely varies. And I think the Series S is great value, but I think the Baldur's Gate stuff was a lightning rod for that, I think, somewhat. And
I got a fucking hammering after all that happened.
Yeah.
You look at those comments on that video about the Series S that I did, and it's like oh, we told you, and it's like, I mean, nothing I actually said is actually out of date if you look at it. But anyway, but yeah. So the last thing is Xbox's next gen. Now this is really damaging for Xbox, because the big thing about these leaks is that these companies are very protective of their marketing narrative. And when something comes along that upsets that, and which changes their plans in terms of when they reveal things, when they bring things to market properly, etc., when they bring things into the community consciousness, it's really difficult for them, which is why they get annoyed at, you know, websites like ours when we, you know, accidentally break embargoes and stuff like that. When, you know, a lot of YouTube leakers do it deliberately because they're dickheads. It's why, you know, it's why things have embargoes. So we know from these documents that next gen is purported to start in Xbox terms in 2028. They're looking at, they're looking. I mean, that would seem to be about right. About 8 years between gens.
Yeah, if you'd asked me when it was going to be, I would have said 2028. So I don't think that bit's that shocking, but it's not ideal.
No.
I think the thing I will say is the thing that they're lucky about is all this. Again, it might not mean that much to everyone. There's me waving about a plastic fork that belongs to my daughter. It might not mean that much to everyone if you're not a hardware techie person, but you can see they haven't locked in much of the silicon, because I think this is a real disaster if this happens in a year's time, year and a half's time, and the silicon's locked in, and then this leaks, and that means all their competitors know what their silicon is. And then that means Sony can go, right, we know we can war game this now, and we know they're going to be roughly this powerful, therefore we're going to do X, Y, Z to beat it. Right now, it's very wishy-washy what's on this thing.
So we actually don't know how powerful the next Xbox is going to be. All we know is that they're still deciding whether they want to use to pivot to ARM architecture, or to continue with x86, which is what all the current consoles are based on.
Well, it's x64.
Sorry, x64, which is in itself kind of an interesting thing, because ARM processors are, like, you know, rapidly taking over the planet. Your phones run on them, and increasingly bigger boxes than your phones are starting to run on that architecture.
Well, it used to just be the architecture for phones, right? That's the thing.
Yeah.
Traditionally. I think probably they will move to ARM, but because I think the Xbox Vision is a deeply scalable experience, and you can't scale x64 down, which is why it's quite difficult to, like the Asus ROG Ally, right? I almost bought one of those. I had a weird wobble during Gamescom where I was like literally sitting waiting for an appointment to start in Microsoft Stand, and I was sitting there like, maybe I'm just going to go on Currys and order a ROG Ally so it's at my house when I get home. And I talked myself out of it going, no, I've got a Steam Deck. But the problem there is that's obviously running an x64 Windows instance, and so you have all the slowdown and all the weird difficulties that come with running Windows on like a handheld gaming device. And one of the things that's interesting is in some of the other slides, they have this big slide that's like a image of everywhere, every single way there is to play Xbox. This is stuff that they are making, but also I guess where the stuff they envision other people making as well. So you have cloud listed on it. In fact, so I've just pulled it up because I thought it better be accurate. So this slide has browser, mobile, Android and iOS, smart TVs, low mid-end TV, third-party streaming sticks, and set-top boxes. Now, what's interesting about that, I just want to say, is all of those are just represented with outlines, icons, not images of prototypes or products.
Yeah.
You've also got high-end PC and Cloud Blade that are represented the same way. But then you have Cloud Device, which is a picture of a small box that looks like it's about half the size. It looks like a half-sized Series S without the big fan on it. So it's a little white box with the Xbox button and a single USB port.
Yeah.
So that looks to me like a box that maybe might be $80 and it just streams xCloud. And then they've got a picture of a handheld device that looks like a Steam Deck, but with Xbox buttons.
Yeah.
And those are pictures of prototypes. And the question is that a Microsoft prototype? Is that maybe someone like Razer or someone working with them? Because Microsoft do that as well. And then they've got consoles. And the same thing, they've also got on that a one-handed controller with a D-pad. It looks like a Wii remote. And a mobile controller, which again looks like an official or officially licensed Xbox controller. Now, there is another slide that says, again, I want to quote accurately, that a handheld is not in scope for first party. But I think that's the interesting thing when it comes to thinking about next gen. Regardless if Microsoft themselves are going to make this stuff or not, they see this as an important part of the ecosystem. And again, it comes to me being a tosser and focusing down on a different aspect. But it's like, yes, there's a slide that says next gen. It's got very vague stuff about the silicon for next gen, and it's got a lot of buzzwords: next gen DirectX ray tracing, dynamic global illumination, micro polygon rendering optimizations, ML based super resolution, etc., etc. All great, sure, it'll be fab. But the interesting thing is the last point, which is FinOS, and it says they're currently lacking a FinOS for under $100 consumer or handheld devices. So this is why you go to ARM, I think. And if you can have a version of the Xbox OS that is really light, one, that makes your OS quick on your main consoles, but two, it opens up the ability to put an Xbox app on Steam that it runs in the Linux framework, and therefore you can install it on a Steam Deck and boot it and see your Game Pass library. And I think that is how Xbox wins, in a sense. It's not going to be in console sales. It's going to be in making all this stuff join up.
Yeah. Well, that has been... I've seen... sorry. I've seen Xbox accused today of having no vision and, and just being a sort of, as you said earlier, a cancer that just keeps acquiring stuff and putting it on a big pile and hoarding it like a dragon. And all these other sort of unfavorable images. But the Xbox vision is that your tally's an Xbox, everything's an Xbox, your phone's an Xbox, your Steam Deck's an Xbox. And that's very much what we're headed toward, right? And that would make as you say, that would make the shift to ARM make a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, I think what we're seeing is in these documents is not everything, as you say, it's quite woolen. There's no concrete specs or anything like that, but it's a direction of travel.
And I also think 2028 is far away, right? That's the thing. So it's not this bit isn't as much of a disaster, because does anyone look at this and go, well, I'm not going to buy an Xbox Series because next gen's around the corner? It isn't around the corner, it's years away. I actually think the refresh stuff is more damaging, because that is something where someone might go, well, I'll wait 18 months. Yeah,
I'm just going to wait, especially if the assumption pans out that the new Xbox has the new controller, which would be a massive selling point. And I think you're right. I think if it isn't bundled with the new models, then that would be a mistake, because support for it would surely plummet in future, right? But yeah, so it's really, really interesting stuff. Potentially quite embarrassing and damaging for Microsoft, who are there's probably a lot of emails zipping around right now.
I've had the odd message describing what it sounds like there, and it does sound a bit chaotic, which it's going to be. There was one thing that's broken. Like it broke right as we started recording this, and I think it sort of sums up why this is embarrassing for Microsoft. And it's just an email from 2022 between Phil and basically the upper leadership team. So it's like Matt Booty's on it, who's the head of Xbox Game Studios, and Sarah Bond, and then some other people. I'm just going to read it, right? The subject line of the email is games. And it's just sent in May 2022. And it was tagged with the high importance, which means Phil clicked the little exclamation mark in Outlook to show he really means business. And the email says, quote, "With the news that Starfield is going to miss holiday, brackets, not broadly communicated yet, let's let Jamie manage that." Jamie's one of the guys on the email, I think. Still not a ton of clarity on the launch date of Redfall and Stalker 2 developments so impacted by the war in Ukraine. I feel we're in a huge hole with our games lineup, both for platform marketing / differentiation and our Game Pass content. We keep talking about a bit. We keep talking about a bit of AAA quarter in the service, and it feels like I think that is a type of a big, and it feels like we are likely to go for a gap of almost 16 months between big exclusive launches on our platform. Halo Infinite being our last on December 8th, 2021. This is really a disaster situation for us, given all we've invested in content across studios, our Game Pass content fund. I think I meant to say, and our Game Pass content fund. He was clearly quite stressed when he wrote this email. We need to learn from this and build a plan forward, unquote. So that's pretty damning, and it shows that they know, despite the outward-facing message of Game Pass is great and we're offering great value, here we have the head of the division emailing basically all of his immediate reports and saying this is, quote, a disaster situation. And then he goes on to say, quote, in terms of learning, I think we need to get much better at overall portfolio planning on our games with real honesty on dates. Doing this from memory, from summer 2021 through to December 2021, we had an amazing lineup of games with Flight Sim to console, Psychonauts 2, Age of Empires 4, Forza Horizon 5, and Halo. There were good third-party games in that time frame as well, like Back 4 Blood. We set a very high bar in 2021 on quality and pacing of content, which was awesome to see. But to come off that year with no big exclusives launching in 2022 is a portfolio planning miss that we cannot afford. If we need to delay launches, understanding there is a financial impact of that, to create more regular beats for us, we need to do that. We have to all understand that this is the situation we're now in. It's a failure of our planning and production execution. So interesting there, because he says that it's their own fault. He says it's a failure of planning, but also interesting to hear him say, if we need to delay games that are done in order to create a calendar that's beneficial down the line, that's what we need to do. And to be honest, in this industry, pretty much nobody does that except Nintendo and to a lesser extent Capcom that I know of. Like Nintendo, another world. Nintendo sometimes sit on games for over a year. Nintendo are bonkers, but which I can never see Microsoft doing. But all that speaks to a company that, it's like you said earlier, direction of travel, right? Like that's a good direction of travel, recognizing that everything's buggered and we've got to do something.
Well, yeah, I mean, it did feel like it had a bit of momentum for like Xbox for a while, immediately following the launch of the Series consoles and everything, and then the momentum just dropped off a cliff, and we got nothing. So, and now with Starfield and everything else happening next year, it feels like it's felt. I've described this before on the site about how Xbox just feels like it's permanently spooling up. So now we're starting to get that stuff coming out. But it really is a real window into of course these guys know. Of course they know that this is like to go for months and months and months without a big exclusive is a disaster.
One more amazing thing in this email, by the way, that I think a lot of people would be pleased to hear is because it goes on for a while after what I quoted, but there's one little thing that Phil says a bit later on, which is, we need to build an accurate list of new game launches that are coming in the next 24 months with expected dates. We're inside that 24 months now. I don't want to litter this list with content updates or seasons for existing games. We need launches. Which again is a really... if nothing else, Phil knows what he's doing.
100%. Yeah. It's just like we can't have another like Xbox Direct where it's just like here's the next expansion for Elder Scrolls Online.
I think the sad thing about this, right, is that Redfall is mentioned multiple times in this email as well as our next big release, and then it was honking, which isn't ideal. You need to avoid that as well. Well,
let's hope that they get their act together, and it certainly looks like, look, we've got Fable to come. That's going to be their next big one, is that right?
What, Fable?
Yeah.
I mean,
have I got that massively wrong?
I'm not sure. I know a little bit about that game. I'm not sure what I can say. But I don't. Well, yeah, I suppose. Obviously, you got Forza. Probably
we've got Shattered Galaxy.
Probably
the
guaranteed one. Fable I wouldn't even place into next year. Whereas you've got Flight Sim 2024, where it's in the name, so it better be out next year. And you've got Hellblade 2 and you've got Avowed, and I have to imagine at least one of those two will come out next year, if not both of them. Hellblade 2 and Avowed have both been in development for quite a while. But then this is the thing about Xbox Game Studios. Like, I'm looking at their wiki page now, and I think the shocker is the amount of stuff they've got announced that doesn't have any window whatsoever. So you've got a game with Kojima, which isn't announced yet. You've got State of Decay 3, no date. You've got South of Midnight, which is the Compulsion Games guys, so the We Happy Few guys. You got Project Maverick, which is the People Can Fly game. You've got Project Mara, which is the Ninja Theory game that isn't Hellblade. You got Perfect Dark, which is probably, again, I don't know anything, but that game, looking at that game now with the knowledge that we have about the new machines, that game screams hardware refresh launch title to me. Perfect Dark with the new Series X. It's like they had Blue Dragon and something else for the Xbox 360 Elite. You know, they always have a first-party beat. Outer Worlds 2, no date. Fable, no window. Everwild, no window. Contraband, that's the Avalanche game, so the I don't know if that's going to end
looks pretty good, to be fair.
Well, yeah, I don't know if that's going to end up being Just Cause-y, although there is a Just Cause game in development as well, but are they making that? I don't know.
Wow. Wow.
That is public knowledge. Square Enix said that in an investor call. When they sold all the IDOS stuff, I think they needed to reassure investors they hadn't divested all of the Western stuff. So they were like, there is a Just Cause game being made. In Exile's game, Clockwork Revolution, and then you've got some Age of Empires stuff. Well, Age of Mythology. So everything there except that we just mentioned, except for literally Avowed Flight Sim, Hellblade, Towerborn, which I can't remember what that one is, Ara History Untold, and a remaster of Killer Instinct, all have no date. They don't even have a year. So,
I'm really hoping that at some point in the first half of 2024, Xbox drops like a direct where they blow everyone's socks off with like, these are games that are coming out, and this is when, because like it feels like that they're on the cusp of doing that, but it constantly feels like they're on the cusp of blowing everyone away, you know?
Well, it's just, the problem is they announced Everwild, Fable, Perfect Dark, certainly all highly anticipated games because people want to see what Rare's cooking. Fable is and Perfect Dark are beloved IPs, and they announced them so early that and then Avowed is a funny one because I wonder how much Avowed changed shape when Microsoft bought Bethesda, because I know when that game was originally in the offing, it was intended to be Microsoft's Elder Scrolls, and then they bought Elder Scrolls, so then I think Avowed changed shape a bit.
Well, it's going to be more like a fantasy equivalent of Outer Worlds, right? It's got a similar structure. It's like it's more instance. It's not like a big wide kind of Skyrim landscape. So it's a bit more Obsidian-y in that sense. I think, by the way, just as an aside, everyone should watch the 5-part Obsidian documentary that they've been putting up for their 20th anniversary. It's on their YouTube channel. It's incredible. Goes into a real kind of warts and all deep dive about how, we were the sequel. We were the sequel house for a while, and a lot of them were shite.
I will say really, also,
candid.
That's the best studio tour I've ever been on, and I went on a studio tour which shows you where Obsidian's come from. They were making like a World of Tanks clone.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Fucking life of me remember what it was even. Armored Warfare. Yeah, Armored Warfare. Which is by a Russian company, and it's probably like a massive money laundering project. But I was out there for that on a press trip for that, and we had a studio tour and stuff like that. And it was amazing talking to people because they were absolutely determined to do a really good job on Armored Warfare and do that game justice. But at the same time, they were working on Pillars 2, they were working on Outer Worlds, they were working on South Park. Well, no, they just shipped South Park, I guess. And, they were not afraid to quietly say, look, this is the work for hire because we want to be able to do Pillars and stuff. And not long after that, Microsoft came in, right? Well, a couple of years
Yeah.
later.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was one of my favorite studio tours because they were so candid.
Yeah.
Fergus is great. It's just he's a real CEO with heart, real studio head with heart, which is quite rare. And that's the one thing you can say about Microsoft and the acquisitions is they have had some stumbles with some of the Bethesda stuff and the state of Redfall and things like that. But the one thing you can say about them is they've let studios maintain their identities and maintain.
That is true. Yeah, they haven't pulled an EA on it, which I think a lot of people were really worried about, especially when it comes to Obsidian, who are such a fragile culture that you really want to preserve, right? Because like Obsidian are a wonderful studio, and you wouldn't want to tamper with the kind of the secret sauce that makes them what they are.
No.
So I think Obsidian are the real jewel in the crown when it comes to Xbox's divisions now. But anyway, all right, let's leave it there. But yeah, what a mad morning it's been.
I mean,
insane.
God help whoever. I'm really curious about like legal implications because based on it went up onto a government portal, so I assume this is someone at the FTC who's fucked up. But I wonder if US law is going to allow the FTC to be liable because this is trade secrets that have gone out, and there's no putting this genie back in the bottle. And that's actually the really interesting thing is like you look at those slides and you look at the concept images and stuff like that. Those new consoles probably are quite far along. So I wonder if Xbox is in a position to move those up out of 25 and move them into 24 because now people know they're coming, and that's got to be
now the cat's out of the bag.
You can't put that genie back in the bottle, can you? And I'm sure those are the discussions going on today, just probably with a lot more swearing.
Yeah.
And these are corporate Americans, they probably don't swear very often. It's probably the one time they're going to swear as much as British people do.
Phil Spencer just going full Malcolm Tucker.